So lastly, but not the least, we're going to take a look at my own personal journey in martial arts seeking for true knowledge. Some of you might already know, I started training martial arts under my dad, right, when he came to South Africa. At the time, he was basically teaching 少北拳 and 八元通背. So those are the two styles that I started training with. Until around 1998, where Master Zhang Yunchao, right, came to South Africa and stayed here for a few months before he moved to America, and he taught me 7-style mentors and the fundamentals of his version of chain style Tai Chi. And his 7-style mentors came from his master, who was a very prominent and respected martial arts master at the time in Shenyang and in the northeastern province. His name is Wang Qingzhai, one of the most famous 7-style mentors masters from that area at his period. Around that similar period, my dad also made a friend with a fellow Chinese martial art instructor in South Africa, who does a very rare style of mentors that's called Shanxi Ren family mentors. It's basically a very strange mentors that fuses Shanxi Dai family Xinyi mechanics with 7-style mentors from Shandong. And the style is actually not taught in Shanxi anymore. His master is from Inner Mongolia. Well, I didn't learn that style from him because I think he's quite secretive about it. But my dad did hang out with him regularly, and I did pick up very interesting points while they were, discussing and demonstrating their stuffs. I do have home videos of it, but I'm not going to share it here because I think he preferred to be not shared in public. Later on in 2001, as I mentioned previously, me and my dad went to America for a competition. And over there I met quite a variety of masters, both from America and from China, including some big shots from Chen Village, who came to do a demo and also having his son compete in the tournament itself. The one chain style master that wasn't from the village that I was quite impressed with at the time was a master named Zhang Zhijun. Here's a photo of me taken with him. You guys may or may not know him, but he's actually quite famous in China. He studied chain style under Chen Zhaokui. He was really famous, and at the time I didn't know better, so I took a seminar with him, and I thought he was really good. But now that I reflect upon the stuff he taught, actually, now I think he's not that good. But I'm showing you this photo just to show that I have met a lot of these famous masters in the Chinese martial arts scene. I just don't like to flaunt these photos around because I don't really think they prove anything. It's just to show that I have been around, I have met people. I have a lot of others that I met but I did not take pictures with. Only reason I took a picture here is because my dad was with me and he liked taking pictures. I'm the opposite, I don't like taking pictures at all. So when he's with me, I very suddenly take pictures. And while we were doing our 3 months teaching in New York, Flushing, Queens, we also got to meet a couple of martial artists. The only one that really stood out was a couple of guys that trained Baji from an old master in Boston that come from the Grandmaster Liu Yinqiao's lineage from Taiwan. I've already mentioned, and that basically changed my view on how a more internal variant of Baji could be practiced. So after we came back from America, I finished my matriculation, which is basically the end of high school in South Africa. And after that, instead of going to university directly, I basically took a 2-year break where I went back to China trying to improve my own personal martial arts skill. So first, I went back alone. I was around 18 at the time. I went back alone. I didn't know anyone. I had a couple of contacts that my dad gave me, phone numbers and stuff, but I actually don't know anyone there. I've never lived there on my own before, so it was quite an experience and adventure. So when I went back to Beijing, the first person I contacted was my father's Shaobei uncle, but I was already doing Bai Tongbai and Shaobei at the time, so I decided I should improve upon my Shaobei because I really liked the style at the time. So I called him up. His name is Zhu Zhengang, Uncle Zhu Zhengang, and he was very happy to help. And he basically took me to Temple of Heaven, where every day in the morning I would go there, and he will brush me upon Shaobei and parts that my dad didn't teach me. You see, because my dad, after he shot the Shaolin Temple and a few other movies, he eventually found religion in form of Buddhism, and he completely lost his interest in martial arts. So he actually stopped training since the age of 36 onwards. So when the Nanhua Temple abbot asked him to come and teach in South Africa, he had to brush up on some of the stuff. So although he was still more than qualified to teach people here, But there are things that he doesn't really remember that well anymore, which is why I decided to go back to China to study with his Shaobei brother to pick up those missing pieces. So here's a picture of my Shaobei uncle Zhu Zhengang, doing a kicking motion in the Shaobei form. I've made videos regarding Shaobei in the past, but in case some of you don't know what it is, it's basically a style that has a philosophy of using both hands and the feet simultaneously at the same time, which is why you see in this photo, he has a kind of an awkward looking pose. And here's a clip taken during my training with my Shaobei uncle Zhu Zhengang.
你在露主甲。
So this Kung Fu uncle of mine, Zhu Zhengang, during his day he was actually quite a prominent fighter, right? It is said, I was told that he participated in one of the early Sanda tournaments in the early 80s before Sanda was a regulated sport. He went in the ring and he actually knocked out one of the other athletes, but was disqualified because he hit the guy in the head 5 times. And during that time, the Sanda rule is that you cannot hit a guy in the head consecutively. You can hit him once and you have to stop. If you consecutively hit someone in the head, it's considered dangerous. People back then didn't want to risk a fatal injury during tournament because that would then cause the government to shut down the sport completely, and therefore he got disqualified. So he was actually quite a respectable fighter during his days. Of course, that's not to say that he will fare well against current professional standard athlete, right? Even if he were to go back to his prime, if he's facing off against current standard champion, he'll probably not win. But back in the days when standard first started, the standard athletes weren't actually proficiently trained like they are today, which is why he was able to come on top. And I also got to meet another Kung Fu uncle of mine called Wang Deyu. He hang out with Zhu Zhengang a lot, and that's why I got to know him. He also knows my dad. He doesn't originally do Shaobei. He's actually he does a very rare lineage of Wudang style from a very elusive master called Zhou Changsen. Very few people in the martial arts scene actually heard of him, but those who do only have good things to say about him. I've never met this master in person, but he's very elusive. And he learned from another elusive master called Gao Ziyun, who's supposed to be a mystical figure almost from the Republic era. Unfortunately, I can't verify any of these facts, so I can only just say that this is what I heard from this Kung Fu uncle Wang Deyu. So he learned Wudang style from them, which is completely not related to the modern Wudang mountain stuff. He also used to learn a very strange thing called the small circle Ba Gua. It's basically instead of 8 steps completing a circle, they take 3 or 2 steps to complete a circle. So he has a very strange version of Ba Gua and a very elusive lineage of Wudang. But because that Wudang master, Zhou Changsen, didn't like him so much because he was kind of poor, didn't give him a lot of money, so they kind of eventually excluded him. And then he started hanging out with this Shaobei uncle, Zhu Zhengang, and eventually he's also started to do a bit of Shaobei. That's why he's sort of my Shaobei uncle in that sense. So I spent a lot of time hanging out with Zhu Zhengang and Wang Deyu uncle, and then learning a bit of Ba Gua from him as well. But at that time I was mostly focusing on Shaobei. And here you can see a picture that I took with him, and the jacket that I'm wearing is actually given to me by Uncle Zhu Zhengang. It's what he used to wear when he was younger. It's basically 12 kilograms of iron filing and pellets in that jacket. And on my hand and legs, I was also wearing 2.5 kilo each. So 2.5 kilogram of iron filings on each of my hand and my feet. Because Uncle Zhu Zhengang believes that you should do weight training to improve your power generation, your speed, and all of that. It's a very external view on how to train power and speed. And at the time, I believed him wholeheartedly, so I used to wear that all the time and do my kicking single draws, punching single draws, and forms in it. And here's a picture of me doing a technique in the Shaobei form, wearing these weights. Just as a side note, right? Eventually, I realized that this is actually not very healthy. If you kick a lot with that kind of weight on you, it actually damages your knees. So my personal advice to anyone who want to do that is you don't do that. Okay, it's actually not very good for you. But at the time, I didn't know better. If I could go back in time and tell myself that, I'll definitely not let myself do a lot of training like this. Here's a short clip taken from my channel, but it's one of the early uploads. I think a new viewer will probably never get to there. It's basically me leading a class that we taught in South Africa. It was shot just after I came back from Beijing. So I was wearing the hand and ankle weights and basically leading the class through the Shaobei kicks that we taught. And all this also shows that I was quite hardcore, involved in the external martial art training at the time before I went internal. The other Chinese martial art masters that hang out on our location with my Shaobei uncles. One of such, for example, is called Master Song, and he does in-style bagua as well as Chinese wrestling. Here is a clip of him showing me Chinese wrestling stuff at his home.
你说你盖我大领不盖？你盖大领躺在这儿就放。
下胳膊贴出去了。
哥们儿，他搞你这儿，我这儿停着你。哎，对你这一搞这个，你俩胳膊捆了。对。你揪我这把手，这不行。这一揪，你看这东西，这一搂你。拿，你看这，你给我拿这儿来，走。
Now, I didn't train under him per se, but I have many encounters like this, like knowledge exchanging, that helped me to broaden my view about and understanding about Chinese martial arts. After I was training with Zhu Zhengang for a while, he suggested I should go and visit the Grandmaster Zhang Rongshi, to further improve my training and knowledge in the Shaobei style. And that's what I did. I called up Zhang Rongshi, but unfortunately, Grandmaster Zhang Rongshi was not available. And instead, I called up Zhu Zhenggang's own master, which is Master Li Fengjiu. He was also the first master to teach my dad Shaobei. And Grandmaster Li Fengjiu was very pleased that that the son of my dad is interested in learning from him, so he invited us over. So we bought a train ticket. Unfortunately, Zhu Zhengang uncle at the time had work, so he couldn't leave. So my other uncle, Wang Deyu, basically took me on the train and we went to Jinzhou. It's a city in the northeastern province. And we stayed with Grandmaster Li Fengjiu for about just under a month, where he personally taught me. But because of his age, he also found two assistant instructors from the Shaobei lineage to basically, show me movement that he's too old to do. And here's basically a picture of Grandmaster Li Fengjiu and me standing next to him. And here's a picture of my two assistant instructors that Grandmaster Li Fengjiu, called to help teach me more high-level stuff in Shaobei.
过来了啊！这一手呢，你看手法这一起走，哎，腰哈子，走，哎，这就跟上，
啪啪，这是第二个，就插外脚碰，这是插外，插外这不头一碰吗？
你看，大连你看，插外脚碰的时候，这不是插外吗？这是勾这腿，这个上去。 啊，干嘛？你看，咵，吊这腿，这才能出。
And here's basically a picture of my farewell feast. Just the night before I left Jinzhou, Grandma Li Fengjiu and the two assistant teachers and their family all got together and had a very nice meal. So after I came back from my concentrated training with Grandmaster Li Fengjiu in Jinzhou, I continued to go every morning to Temple of Heaven to train Shaobei with my two uncles. And around that time, one of my mom's close friends heard about my purpose of visit, and then she contacted me and said that she knew like a classmate from back in school days who is a very prominent Chinese martial art master and is offering to introduce me. So I very happily accepted her offer and went to meet a master of both Chen-style Tai Chi from the Chen Fa Ke lineage, as well as in-style Bagua. Right? This master goes by the name of Xu Shixi. Some of you who knows about the Beijing martial arts scene should have heard of him. He was quite famous because he taught a black student who is known as the Black Taoist in America. At the time, I didn't know about the Black Taoist or Xu Shixi. I purely met him because my mom's close friend happened to knew him from the school days. But I was quite interested in Chen-style Tai Chi, so I was quite happy to have met a master to learn Chen-style Tai Chi. Now, the reason I don't have a picture of me and Master Xu, right, is because here's the thing. I am not a tourist. I don't go around taking pictures with everyone I meet. All the pictures that I am sharing with you here are taken a couple of days before I left China after my 2-year trip, almost like a farewell thing. So the reason I don't have a picture with Xu is because I stopped going there after a couple of months, and therefore I didn't get to take a picture at the time when I'm about to leave. And the reason I stopped going there after a couple of months is not because he's bad or anything. It's just that the stuff that he's teaching just don't resonate with me. His idea of combat is very focused on joint manipulation and then throwing by catching people in a joint lock and then forcing them to the ground. And I personally don't find that very useful, and I've never really successfully been able to use such approach. And around that time, I happened to meet another master who I think for me was better fit, and that's why I left him. But before that, he's also trained in Temple of Heaven, and just about 10-20 meters away from where I train Shaobei, we can literally see each other's training ground. So when I was training with him, basically one morning I would train with Shaobei crowd, the next morning I'll go train with Master Xu, and the morning after that I'll go back to Shaobei, and so forth. So I kept it up for a couple of months. Eventually I met another master in the Temple of Heaven who I thought was much better for my personal taste, and that's why I stopped going to Master Xu. That's not to say that he isn't good at all. Although looking back from my current understanding, I do think that even though he was a student of Feng Zhiqiang and I think of Tian Xiuchen or something, another prominent member of the Chenfake lineage, although he was a student of Feng Zhiqiang and the other person, but he didn't quite get the same mechanic that I can see from other members of the Chenfake lineage. So which is why in my previous videos I did mention that I have trained under Chenfake lineage of Taiji, although I don't see myself as representative of them because I didn't train long enough and I moved on ever since. Now during that period of 2-year stay in China, in Beijing, I've also interacted with a lot of other martial art styles and groups, masters, going to some gatherings, function events. I'm not going to mention all of them here because there's just frankly too many of them. I'm only going to highlight the ones that I thought was more interesting and have more influence on me. So one such incident is that I was browsing one of the largest Chinese martial art forum in China at the time called wushuweb.com. I was a member there at some point, and I came across all kind of weird people on the internet. One particular person invited me to visit his the Kung Fu club that he belonged to, which was in Beijing Union University. So one afternoon, I took up on his offer and I visited his Kung Fu club. And that afternoon, I basically did friendly sparring with every member they have at the time. So first, I sparred with the head of the club, and he lost, and he was pretty sour about it. Eventually, he actually left the club because of this incident. Drama that I won't go into here. Then I sparred with the second man in charge. I also won, but he took it much nicer, and we became close friends ever since. Right? He does Song family Xingyi, from one of the prominent Song family Xingyi masters in Beijing, from at the time and currently, called Master Zhang Zengji. A couple of years ago, he was selected as the president of the Beijing Xingyi Association. So he's both well respected in the traditional scene as well as prominent in the so-called political scene of Chinese martial art in Beijing. At the time, I didn't meet his master. I only met him during my visit to that club in Union University. He was really big. He could pack a really hard punch. If I were hit by him, I'll probably be gone. But luckily for me, he was kind of slow and telegraphed, so I was able to beat him with my speed. He wasn't able to punch me properly, which gave me the false impression that internal styles punch hard, but they are too slow and can't match up with the external styles that I was doing, whether it's Baiyan Tongbei or Shaobei, which kind of made me don't want to go into internal style. I thought that it was inferior compared to external style. After I sparred with him, I also then sparred with another member who did Sanda, and then another member who did some random stuff. I won all my exchanges. This is not to say that I'm great at fighting, it's just that I had more experience than those casual practitioners from that club. And other than the head of the club, which got pretty sour and left, I became close friends with everyone else in the club at the time. After our initial exchange, I visited them quite often to both spar and to exchange knowledge and understanding. Here's a video of me helping them to do a Shaobei demo on one of the school's club promotional days. So I'm obviously not part of the club because I don't go to that school, but I was quite involved at the time in the club activity in order to help them to get more attention and more members.
这种东西绝非是平时表演那种套路武术，这是真正的武术，进攻型武术。
Okay, so here's a picture taken at our farewell feast. The one that's sitting in the middle with glasses, the nerdy looking guy, he's actually the eldest disciple of the Song family Xingyi master Zhang Zengji. I know he don't look like much, he's actually an eye surgeon. So even though he's the eldest disciple, he actually doesn't have that much time to train. In the medical profession, they're quite busy, make a lot of money, but you also sacrifice your personal life. But he's very respected by his own Xingyi brothers in the system. And I actually met him by accident before I was introduced to him in Temple of Heaven, right? So he basically went there to do something, he saw me train, he went to do his stuff, he come back, like an hour or two later I was still training, so he got curious, and he walked up to me and started chatting with me. And after chatting a bit, then we realized that we both know his Xingyi brother, Zhang Ming. So I'm sitting next to him, the one in black Puma shirt, that's basically the friend that I met. His name is Zhang Ming. He was one of the heavy hitters at the time, and even till today, he's one of the most prominent disciples of Master Zhang Zengji. Right? I think last time I met him in China, he was taking classes that his master has no time for. And the one standing at the back, right in the middle, that's the younger Xingyi brother, also from Master Zhang Zengji. I can't quite remember his name anymore. At the time, he just came back from military service. He was in the Chinese Special Forces. So at the time, he just came back from his service, and he got a job in a local police station as a police officer. And here's a photo taken on the same day. The guy that is right next to me, he's the stand-up practitioner. Some other people might have claimed that they defeated a professional stand-up athlete, but I'm not going to do that. He did went to a state stand-up school, but I think he didn't really spend too much time there. He didn't train hard enough. He wasn't that good a stand-up fighter, which is why I was able to come on top. So I was just better than him. He wasn't as well trained, right? It doesn't mean I'm actually being able to defeat professional stand-up athletes. And the guy next to him, he does Yiquan at the time. So around that same period, someone introduced me to a Yiquan master in Temple of Heaven, right? And he told me that this is the highest leveled master of the 4th generation. I was very curious about Yiquan at the time because I read some books written by Wang Xuanjie on Wang Xianzhai, which make Wang Xianzhai seem like a godly being, right? It's like his ability was like beyond comprehension. I always wanted to kind of check out because some people like my Shaobei uncle told me that they've also met Yiquan practitioners during their younger days, and they weren't that impressive. So I was kind of on the fence about whether Yiquan is good or not. And obviously without physically seeing it, I can't really decide. And at the time, because of my sparring with Zhang Ming, I tend to think that internal styles can hit really hard but really slow, so they're actually not that good compared to my external styles. I'll always be able to beat them with my speed and agility. And I couldn't be more wrong or further from the truth, right? And I only realized this when I met this Yiquan master in the eastern gate of Temple of Heaven, and his name is Li Quanshan. Most of you viewers here probably don't know him, but just take my word for it, he was quite prominent at the time in his generation. He studied under the younger of the 2 Yao brothers, Yao Chengrong, and the Yao brothers, obviously, their father Yao Zongxun is one of the main disciples from Wang Xianzhai. The Yao brothers are very well respected in the martial art community in Beijing. And my teacher Li Quanshan, he was actually the godson of Yao Chengrong, and at the time, before he left the school, he was responsible to take on any challenges that came to the school. So anyone want to go and challenge the style or try to experience the ability, Master Yao Chengrong would not lift a finger. He would send Li Quanshan to go and beat the guy back. So he was one of the highest level students or disciple from Yao Shenrong school in the 90s. Eventually he came out because he had to earn a living. He can't just keep on working for the school. So eventually he came out and he tried a couple of things. Eventually he got into debt collecting. And during one incident, the guy refused to pay the debt and sent people to beat him up. So he got angry. He punched the guy in the head, and the guy fell to the ground and broke his skull. His skull cracked. Right. Eventually, Li Quanshan 老师's boss had to pay a lot of money to get the guy a plastic skull to replace the cracked bone skull, and he also went to jail for a whole year. Now I don't know if he actually cracked the skull was his punch, or because of the power from his punch, the guy fell to the ground and that momentum broke the skull. I'm not sure what exactly happened. I don't think anyone knows, but he went to jail for a year because he cracked that man's skull as a result of a confrontation where he wanted to collect debt. And after that, he stopped doing debt collecting. He came out and tried to do some flea market business, but he actually don't like it, so he actually hired somebody else to sell stuff for him, and then he spent his days in Temple of Heaven. And when I met him, he was trying to teach Yiquan, but unfortunately in Beijing, if you want to do Yiquan, you're probably going to go to more famous and recognized master. You wouldn't go to him, although he was respected in the circle, right? Particularly after he won the Beijing Yiquan fighting contest in 1999. He came out first in his category, where all the Yiquan guys came together and fight it out. He also won second place in a Sanda tournament held in Beijing around 1999. Now obviously, second place isn't first place, but he was competing against professional Sanda athletes from various sport academies in Beijing at the time. He's one of the only Chinese traditional martial art practitioners that I know of who went in the ring against professional Sanda athletes and be able to, win matches without himself having any standard training at all. He was a pure Yiquan practitioner, never done anything else in his life. So he was widely regarded as the best fighter of his generation. But when his teachers are still alive, Yao Chengguang, Yao Chengrong, etc., Da Cui, and so forth, there's no one actually want to learn from him. At the time, I didn't really know the ins and outs of Yiquan as well as I do today. And I was just purely by chance introduced to him by someone else who knew him, and he told me that he was really good, and therefore I went to to check it out. And when I went to him, I asked him I've heard Wang Xianzhao was able to do crazy stuff like sending people flying, all of that. I said, is that true? Can I experience it? And then he told me to stand there, and he first put his hand on my chest. He did hu pu around the Yiquan power generation, and I flew right out onto my back. I slipped on the soil floor. I was in short at the time, my arms were all scraped, bleeding and stuff. I got up, I was like, whoa, what the hell just happened? And then he placed his fist, on my chest, shoulder area here. He placed it right here, and then he did a very short burst of power. And then for a moment, I heard a massive noise in my ear, goes dong. And then after that, I was incoherent, right? I was like, I can't focus. I struggled to focus. I had a huge shock. And I couldn't really focus, I couldn't process, my brain couldn't process, I couldn't react to stuff for a minute or 2 minutes. It was really scary feeling. And after that, after that encounter, I went back home, I stood about it, and the next day I went to him and I said, what, can I learn Yiquan from you? So that was the first time where I experienced, a type of internal power generation firsthand. And it was really, really impressive, and it's not something that I've ever experienced within the external martial art training. Not that external martial art can't hurt you or damage you, but that kind of shock and that kind of power is just not the same. And when I went there, he still thinks maybe that I'm not convinced, so he gave me gloves and then he asked me to spar with him. And that's when I realized that not all internal styles or practitioner, shall I say, not even styles, practitioner is as slow as my friend Zhang Ming. Right, I'm not saying that Song style is always slow, not at all. Just that my friend particularly telegraphed his punch, which is easier for me to evade and maneuver. Whereas this Yiquan teacher Li Quanshan, he was so concealed and swift, I can't even see his punch until it's too late. Right, instead of putting a punch back and punch, his hand is here, he will touch me, control my balance, and then the punch will just happens in no distance. And so I got trashed pretty badly by him. and it further affirmed my dedication that I should definitely learn Yiquan from him. And later on, I heard from him that he done this kind of demo punch and power generation to many people who came in and asked about martial art. I'm the only one who actually went back to him and paying him money to learn from me. Everyone else just get punched, get shocked, and then think he's crazy and never came back. I had to say though, at the time I was pretty concerned about my skull, right? After hearing that he cracked somebody's skull, so I always kind of make sure he didn't punch me on my head. And here's a clip taken in more recent years of him demonstrating his push-hand ability. Unfortunately, I don't have a video of him doing fighting or sparring. And I have to say, right, he's the closest that I've seen and met to the skill level of the Yao brothers among the 4th generation practitioners.
是能提，你这人是能旋，对不对？对不对？这就多了，这还多了，对不对？就跟做散手一样，你那来我是要躲，你这来我是要闪，推手一样，你来吧，对不对？躲，来闪一个，你每次来你顶我的都是顶空的，是不是空了？
对，没顶不死的。
你不光进去，你一关我就。这是对不对啊？这一道，这是
努力前面是挡着你，小心。
这没有，这是
So I spent quite a long time with him, doing from stance training to power generation, basically the whole works of Yao lineage Yiquan. After 1 month, or maybe even less than that, he started to let me spar with him. And then I say spar is actually more just about him kicking my ass left, right, and center. It was harsh and hard, but it was also a very good experience and training for me. So every day I'll go there, I'll do my 混元桩 or 鸡鸡桩 for an hour and a half, do 视力 a few thousand times, 发拳, and then, then he will put on gloves and he'll kick my ass for about half an hour to an hour, and then, then we go home. And I continued to train with him until towards the end of my 2-year trip. Unfortunately, at the time, I'm the only student, and it's just that it's not very sustainable for him. And he got an offer to go and do a seminar in Hangzhou, right? It's another city in the south. So he went there, and then he was very well received by people there, right? People were there, unlike people in Beijing, who are used to seeing the Yao brothers, Da Cui, etc. Over there, they've never seen this caliber of internal style. So they, pledged that he will stay there. So he basically stayed there, and he basically moved over with his family. And ever since last I heard, he was very successful, one of the highest regarded traditional martial art masters in the city of Hangzhou, and has over 30 students. So he was doing far better there than he were doing in Beijing, and I'm quite happy for him. But unfortunately, that ended my training in Yiquan. And in case you're wondering why I didn't find Yao brother or someone else at the time, because I was also toward the end of my trip in China, so I didn't want to start a new teacher only to to leave China and go back to South Africa in a couple of weeks. And because of that, I didn't get to take a picture with him, but I do have a picture here where it's a group photo that he was also included. So in this photo here, the gentleman standing on the second from the left, that's my Yiquan 老师 Li Quanshan. The one next to him you should already recognize as Zhang Ming, my Song style Xingyi practitioner friend. One next to him is Zhu Geyi. He's a Yiquan practitioner, not from my Li 老师 line. He's from somewhere else. And the one next to him, that's my Shaobei uncle Wang Deyou. The one behind him is a close friend of mine who also practiced Shaobei, was my uncle Zhu Zhenggang. And he is also a student at the time from the Beijing Sport Academy, specializing in contemporary wushu. So this photo was taken, I think, a week after I was introduced to my Yiquan 老师, and it was taken in a very interesting event, right? As the headline on the back says, this is the first Chinese MMA competition or knowledge exchange event. And actually, I didn't go to the event with him. I was invited by my Song style Xingyi friend, right, from that university's martial art club. my Yiquan Lao Shi actually was invited by someone else, and we just happened to meet each other on the event. And what's special about this event is that this is, as that title suggests, the first ever MMA exchange competition or matches that was held in China. And this actually is the event that gave birth to Xu Xiaodong, right? I think most of you would have heard of this name by now. He's the famous MMA fighter that challenged a fake Taiji master a couple of years ago, beat him in like 9 seconds, and after that proceeded to call out a lot of fake masters, including the Chen Village, got a lot of flaming and oppression from the authorities. Eventually was completely cut off from social media. If you don't know it, just a quick Google should give you a good picture of who Xu Xiaodong is. So before this particular event, Xu Xiaodong was just a standard athlete and then a standard instructor at the Shanghai Sport Academy. And this event, he took a bunch of his classmates from Shanghai Sport Academy, right? One of the most prestigious sport academy in Beijing. He took a bunch of his classmates, formed a team, and represented Sanda to compete in this event against Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guys that was taught by one of the earliest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA pioneers in China called Andy P. There were many fights on the day, but the highlight was Xu Xiaodong versus Andy P, during which Andy P got Xu Xiaodong in an armbar and submitted him, and thus won the match. Even though Xu Xiaodong's kick was really hard, and later on Andy P mentioned that he actually broke his forearm during that fight from blocking Xu Xiaodong's kicks, and therefore was never able to compete again thereafter, and he was focusing more on promoting the sport. But losing to an armbar also completely changed Xu Xiaodong's life and made him decide to go and study Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and MMA. Eventually, instead of being a standard athlete, he eventually became one of the pioneers in Chinese MMA sport. So this was also the first event that I got to meet Xu Xiaodong. At the time, I just know that he led the Sanda team. I didn't really think too much. I didn't know he was going to be a internet celebrity, I think like 15 years down the line. But I still remain in contact with him. Not like buddies with him, but from time to time I chat with him. And give him some intels on the traditional Chinese martial art world, who's who and who did what, etc. So during this event, I also participated. I fought against one of Xu Xiaodong's teammates, a professional standard athlete from Shanghai Sport Academy. So here you can see a picture of me fighting a standard athlete, and on the back there you can see that's Xu Xiaodong, photobombing my photo. So before this, I fought a lot of amateurs and casual practitioners, but this was the first time that I ever fight someone that's on a professional capacity in an official kind of event, right? With spectators everywhere watching and stuff. So I was, way in over my head and didn't know what to expect from a professional standard athlete. I basically kicked him in the balls once and got a warning for it. I got some good shot in, but I was eventually TKO'd. Which is, of course, no surprise, because unless you are trained in a professional capacity, just the sheer difference in athleticism is going to make all the difference in the fight. So let me just clarify that at the time I only met my Yiquan teacher, for a week or so. So at the time I was still basically doing shot-based stuff, and obviously it didn't really work against the standard athlete. And it was a very good wake-up call for me, because before that I thought I was pretty good already. But after that I realized just that everyone I've met up to that point are not properly trained. And it gave me even more motivation to train harder and train more properly from there onwards. And in case you were wondering, none of my other traditional martial art friends, step up into the ring. It was just me. And beside me, I think there was only another traditional practitioner from somewhere else that I don't know of who went and fought the standard athlete. Everyone else was just there to watch, right? So beside two of us fighting that day, doing traditional martial art, everyone else fighting on that day was a standard versus jiu-jitsu. And without saying, jiu-jitsu won most of the matches. Right, and back to during my training with Chen style Taiji master, alright, Xu Shixi. One day actually I wanted to train, and I saw a new guy that came to train with him as well. And clearly the guy, he's Chinese, but you can see that he's not from China. So after the class, I went and talked with him because I'm also not from China. And turns out that he's a Hong Kongese guy who lives in Holland. And that's when I first met one of my best friends and Kung Fu brother, Rene Ho. So that afternoon we went to have lunch together and spent a couple hours chatting, and instantly we became best friends because we both have a strong passion towards learning and training Chinese martial arts. So here's a picture taken with me and my friend Rene Ho while we were visiting one of the Tibetan Buddhist temples in Beijing, Yunhe Gong. And Rene is a very important influence in my martial art journey because through him I got to meet a lot of other masters that I otherwise would not have heard of. For example, he told me that at the time, he was training with a Ma family Mantis master, right? So Ma family Mantis is funded by Grandmaster Ma Hanqing. If you remember from my previous videos, he was one of the original members in the sport committee that decided on the early Sanda ruling. He was also the headmaster of the first public Kung Fu school opened in Beijing after the Cultural Revolution that my dad taught at. So he learned Mantis from two masters from Shandong, but because he sort of had an early childhood experience with Wu style Tai Chi, as a result, his Mantis differs from the original version from Shandong, which is why eventually he started calling it the Ma family Mantis, right? So he teaches Wu style Tai Chi, as well as Plum Flower Mantis and Six Harmony Mantis. So Rene was telling me that he was learning with one of Grandmaster Ma Hanqing's disciples at the time, and he suggests that I go and check it out. Now I've always had an interest in Mantis, especially after I've learned 7 Star from that Master Zhang Yunchao, right, a friend of my dad. I kind of had this interest in Mantis. I saw Mantis have very clever handwork and it's pretty good at fighting. And furthermore, Rene told me a story upon hearing that I was training Yiquan at the time. Basically, he says that one of the masters that taught Grandmaster Ma Hanqing, right, namely Shan Xiangling, in his days, he fought against Yao Zongxun, right, the father of the Yao brothers, one of the most prominent disciples of Wang Xiangzhai. So the Mantis master Shan Xiangling fought against Yao Zongxun and won the fight by knocking Yao Zongxun out, and as a result, Yao Zongxun lost a tooth. Now at the time, I was first-handly experiencing the combat ability of Yiquan, and I saw that Yiquan was one of the best Chinese martial art systems when it comes to fighting. So I couldn't comprehend how this, Shan Xiangling was able to defeat Yao Zongxun and knock out one of his tooth and knock him out. So because of this, I was very curious, and I decided to take up Rene's offer, and I went to meet with his Mantis teacher, which then also became my Mantis teacher, and his name is Master Ma Weiling. Right, so here's a photo of us taken at the ancestral temple in Beijing after one of our training sessions toward the end of my trip. So upon meeting my Plum Flower Mantis teacher, Ma Lao Shi, I couldn't resist, to ask just exactly how did that old Mantis master, right, Shan Xiangling, defeated the Yiquan master Yao Zongxun, because at the time, I was very curious about how that actually happened. And the way Ma Lao Shi explained it to me at the time was that Yao Zongxun came with a punch, Shan Xiangling was very quick and he evaded with footwork and bodywork, and then did a quan chui, which is like a hook, in return. And because Shan Xiangling had over 10 years of iron hand training, right, his fist was as hard as iron and therefore knocked Yao Zongxun out and knocked out one of his teeth. Upon hearing the story, I basically went back and thought about this whole thing. Right, Yiquan at the time for me was very strong because it had very powerful punches. But then, according to Ma Lao Shi's story, Yao Zongxun missed his punch when he threw it at Shan Xiangling, and even Shan Xiangling knocked him out. So then I realized that there are 3 important things in martial arts. Firstly, there is speed. Right, everyone needs to have some amount of speed. If you have no speed, you can't make a move, and therefore you cannot win. And the next, obviously, you have to have certain type of technique or approach to combat. Naturally, in Yiquan, you focus less on your technique and more on power, which is the third element, right? The TriEssence that for me was the most important aspect of martial art in general. So obviously, Yiquan has speed, has power, but not a lot of technique. Not saying that it doesn't have technique, but its technique is more rudimentary, it's straightforward. You just come and you try to hit someone. Whereas Mantis, on the other hand, have very scaly or slippery hidden techniques that you could try to trick your opponent. So at the time I thought, basically Yao Dongxing was a straightforward punch, where Shan Xiangling was easy to evade, and he was more slippery and caught Yao Dongxing off guard and therefore knocked him out. So to me, even though Mantis doesn't have the same type of power generation as Yiquan, but it makes it up by having smarter technique and fight smarter, and of course the supplementary of having iron hand, which then makes up for the lack of body mechanic and power generation. At least that's what I thought at the time. Of course, many years later, my Mantis friend Boris told me the actual story from Shandong side. He actually eventually went and studied 6 Harmony Mantis with disciples from Shan Xiangling's line. And the actual story was that Shan Xiangling actually sucker punched Yao Dongxun, so it wasn't a proper fight. Yao Dongxun was picking on a Taiji master at the time, and Shan Xiangling was a friend of that Taiji master, Yang Yuting, right? Yang Yuting was a Taiji master. He's a Wu stylist, very well respected, but he himself is not very good at combat, and he's a very friendly guy. So Yao Dongxun was basically bullying him at the Central Park, and Shan Xiangling basically came on the side and just punched Yao Dongxun in the face. So that is the version of story that my friend Boris told me, which only happened much later, many years later, which then changes how it actually happened. But either way, my understanding of the TriEssence, which is speed, technique, and power, it came to me after I heard Ma Laoshi's version of the event, and basically shaped how I understand Chinese martial art from there onwards. Stories that Boris told me about the event and just made me realize that Shan Xiangling didn't win by being having superior technique or more smart way to fight. He basically sucker punched someone. When you sucker punch someone, obviously you have a higher chance to win. But of course, one can also argue that Yao Dongxun didn't have his situational awareness, etc. But obviously, personally, I would say that maybe Yao Dongxun wasn't at his best, but Shan Xiangling's victory shouldn't count because it was a sucker punch. And in my current view, I don't think overall Mantis is as good a system as Yiquan. But obviously that's just my opinion. Mainly it's because a lot of the stuff that Mantis uses, a complicated, smart technique, it kind of falls apart when you are under stress in an actual fight, especially with someone who has a superior structure, superior power. So in my opinion, after years of training and trying to apply the stuff I learned from Mantis into combat, it doesn't work for me. But of course, that is my opinion. It might work for other people. So I'm not saying that absolutely wouldn't work, but if you ask me, I would say Yiquan is a superior combat system to Mantis. But at the time, right, from 2003 to 2004, all the way maybe to 2008, I actually thought they were kind of equal because the one has better power, the one has better technique. So obviously, I started doing Ma Family Mantis much later than I started doing Yiquan, but I did continue training under Ma Weiling Laoshi until I left China. And during my training there with Ma Weiling Laoshi, I got to meet some of his other students, and beside my friend Rene, another very interesting person is Boris. Right? He's a Russian guy who at that time, right, 2003, 2004, he was already living in Beijing for over 10 years. And he speaks fluent Chinese, knows everything about China. He literally, he's no different other than his look from a Chinese person there. So we became very close friends as well because we all share a very strong passion for Chinese martial arts. And he was very interested in weapon fighting, so he took me to his Kendo class to check it out. And that's how I started to do Kendo as well while I was staying in China under Jian Laoshi. And even though Kendo is not Chinese martial arts, but at the time it gave me a lot of insight into how the Chinese masters that I've met up to that point mostly have no clue on how to use their weapon. Like if you ask them, they'll show you do this, you do that. But when you try to do those things in an actual fighting context with full speed and no holding back, most of the time they will just fail. So after I was doing Kendo, I started to take a stick and I would go into the park, and whenever someone mentioned that they know how to fire with weapons, and we'll have a casual bout with sticks, which is quite dangerous actually. So I don't recommend you guys try this without protective gear. But at the time I was young, I didn't really think about it. And luckily I didn't break anything, but I did injure other people from here and there. And it kind of made me realize that the majority of the Chinese masters have no clue how to use the weapon that they practice. I mean, obviously, most of them don't even know how to use their hands, but the problem is even more severe when it comes to weapon sparring. And my friend Boris also runs a YouTube channel called Sword Meister. It's a very good source for mentors, 戳脚 fans, as well as Chinese martial art in general. So definitely check him out, and if you like it, subscribe to his channel. So one day I went to visit my Russian friend Boris at his apartment, and I saw a picture of someone I recognize, right? It's basically Uncle Yu Chenghui, the guy who played the villain in the Shaolin Temple, right, with a big beard, and the one who reinvented the double hand straight sword. And I was like, oh, I know this uncle. And it turns out that Boris was very interested in this Uncle Yu's double hand straight sword, and we started talking about how everything goes. And that got me to wanting to learn that form. So I got his number from my dad, and I called him up. But unfortunately, at the time, he was shooting a TV series in Shanghai, and that was also towards the end of my trip, so I can't really wait for him to come back. So instead, he introduced me to one of his top students that was residing in Beijing at the time, which is a lady you see in the photo here. Her name is Cui Luyi. She was a multiple national contemporary form champion of her days, and then at that time when I met her, she was basically a contemporary form instructor. She was really nice, and she taught me the double hand straight sword form in place of Uncle Yu Chenghui. And ever since then, that form has become one of my favorite forms to perform in any function or event. And here's a video of me performing that double hand straight sword form, which I newly learned at the time at one of the cultural functions at the Beijing University. Another interesting figure that I met at the time was a Baiyan Tongbei master called Zhang Xinbin. I think he's actually quite well recognized in Europe these days, because he goes there every second year to give a training camp with the Zhenwu Chinese martial art organization. At the time where I met him, I've already had an idea on Baiyan Tongbei from my father, and through my exchange with my Yiquan teacher, as well as that professional standard athlete, I kind of realized that Baiyan Tongbei have a major problem. While it is fast and agile, it lacks knockout power. I can hit a guy in the face, it might daze him, but it doesn't stop him from knocking me out or charging into my space. Which is why at the time I believed that that Baiyan Tongbei is inferior to Yiquan. Upon meeting him, it kind of made me change my mind, because he does a very different version of Baiyan Tongbei, where he focuses on power generation, hitting fast and really hard, rather than this whoopee-like motion that majority of the Baiyan Tongbei practitioners does. At the time, I actually realized that this power generation method that he teaches is very similar to Yiquan. So I asked him, I said, did you also train Yiquan in the past? And he told me, no, this is how Baiyan Tongbei is supposed to be. Which obviously I believed at the time, because he's the teacher. It was only years later, where I got to meet some other Baiyan Tongbei practitioners, as well as seeing clips of Zhang Xinbin's Baiyan Tongbei brothers doing their stuff, and then I realized that it is only Zhang Xinbin that is different. Everyone else looked just like how my dad taught me, which would then suggest that Zhang Xinbin changed his version of Baiyan Tongbei rather than his version being the original. And upon further inquiry, I discovered that he actually studied Yiquan under a person named Li Jianyu, which explains why his Tongbei looks different to everyone else from that same system. Right, so and here's a picture of me with another Yiquan practitioner who learned from Yao Zhongxun. So I wasn't his student per se, but He's a friend of my dad, so there were on occasion where I met with him and I discussed what I learned from my Yiquan teacher, and then he gave me his feedback on his understanding, which is different to my Yiquan teacher, but it kind of helped me to have a better overall understanding on the Yao lineage of Yiquan. And there's so many more styles and practitioners that I did come across, exchange knowledge and or cross handles during my 2 years that I spent living in Beijing, full-time doing training and researching in Chinese traditional martial arts. I'm not going to mention all of them here because some of them I don't even remember so well, and I don't want to take more time. This video is already very long. But the ones that I did talk about today and share footage and photos of should give you a rough idea of how much time and effort I did spend in those 2 years in traditional Chinese martial art research and practice. So my typical day back then is I'll wake up around 7, I'll go to Temple Heaven at 8, I'll either be training with my Shaobei uncle or in the beginning was, was Xu Zhixi for Chen style Tai Chi. And then later on it would be with my Yiquan Laoshi. And as time went on, I basically spent more and more time with my Yiquan teacher rather than doing Shaobei. And eventually I just stopped doing Shaobei altogether. And then I usually have lunch with one or both of my Shaobei uncles. And then in the afternoon, I'll usually be training Plangfao mentors with Ma Laoshi. Or, when there's no classes, I'll basically, be walking around other parks and checking out what other people do. Or visiting friends with other martial art styles, etc. And in the evening, I'll be either going to train Kendo at Beijing University, or I'll be training Baiyuan Tongbei with Zhang Xinbin Laoshi at the time. So as you can see, basically my whole day for those 2 years has been dedicated to training various type of Chinese martial arts. And that's how I was able to gather so much knowledge and information in a relatively short period of time. Which is why, whenever someone tells me, they train harder than me, they spend more effort in Chinese martial arts than me, not impossible, but I usually just lost because, again, it's not impossible, but it's very, very hard for someone to spend more time at it than I ever had. Now, of course, when two people spend some amount of time invested into training a particular type of skill, it does not always yield a similar amount of result. In fact, I know quite a few instances where practitioners spend 5 or sometimes even 10 years into training a certain style. And when I say train, I mean they really clock the hours that was required of the teacher. But at the end of it, they still has not achieved the results that they were expecting to achieve. So what this tells us is that obviously training correctly is just as important as the amount of time you spend training. In fact, some might argue that training correctly is even more important. However, this does not mean that the amount of time you spend training is not important at all. It is still very vital to the result you can achieve. And statistically speaking, I know for a fact that most of the people who criticize me on my channels don't even spend half the effort all the time into researching how to train and as well as spending it into the actual training itself. And I don't mean that, you find some training, you do it for a couple of weeks and you get bored. I'm talking about years and years of non-stop everyday training, right? Very few people actually can do that statistically speaking, which is why I really don't care or give a flying donkey about what they think. It's very easy for anyone to just be a critic behind the keyboard and monitor, but very few actually put the money where their mouth is and actually invest the time, like I've shown you here that I did in the past and still do, into Chinese traditional martial arts. And of course, it's not to say that okay, I made so many masters and invest so much time, therefore I'm really good at it. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that when I make videos about any traditional martial art related topics, I do have the background to back up my information. I'm not saying it out of thin air, out of my thumb. Furthermore, between my trip back to China for those 2 years, until I've completely settled with internal martial art like I did in more recent years, between that time span, I've also come across numerous southern external martial art practitioners. For example, I've met with someone that is a master called Zhou Qiang. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name in Cantonese. He's one of the senior masters and practitioners of Daksheng Pi Gua style, right? Which is a style that fuses monkey style with Pi Gua from the north. They are very prominent in Hong Kong. and I believe Zhou Qiang is one of the disciples of the previous head of the style and lineage. And when he came to visit his own son in South Africa, I managed to meet him through a friend, and actually took some lessons with him while he was here, learning some basic form introduction Pigua lineage. I also have this friend who does Wing Chun and Hongge. His Wing Chun is from Yip Man lineage, and his Hongge I think is from Lin Shirong lineage. And yeah, he exchanged his Hongge and Wing Chun for my Yiquan. So basically, we taught each other our own style. I also have friends that practice TriEssence. I've also came across people who were from the Five family, including Zhouge, the one that's merged between Hongge and Laoge. I've also met people that practice Southern White Crane, Southern Mantis. I didn't train with all of them, but I do have a fairly good understanding on the two main branches of Southern styles, the Five family and the Hakkas. I very seldomly, if ever, talks about Southern styles in my videos, but just to let you know that I also do have some decent amount of knowledge when it comes to Southern style. I don't just know about Northern styles. In any case, this concludes the first half of my journey in searching and practicing Chinese traditional martial art, where I spend most of my time practicing various types of external martial art styles. Now, it is true that during this time period, especially my trip in China, I've encountered my Yiquan teacher and also spent a lot of time and effort into training Yiquan. But at the time, I thought Yiquan was just an external martial art with a more refined body mechanic. Right? At that time, I didn't really understand or appreciate the finer, deeper mechanics of internal martial arts, which I only realized many years later when I started practicing my lineage of Tai Chi. If you're interested in the second half of my personal martial art journey and wonder how I decided to go from external into a full internal martial art training, then stay tuned for the next and final part of this mini-series where I discuss my journey into the internal martial art and how I went about looking for my current two masters and found the lineage of internal martial art that I enjoy and believe to be both authentic and practical.